Okay, so welcome back, everybody. We're class number 15, and I'll explain on my source sheet in a minute. I was just thinking, I was coming up for the title for this week. I realized that we're learning Yitro and Mishpatim, and it's all about Matan Torah and Har Sinai, and there's an opinion that Parshat Bahar and Sefer Vayikra belongs in Sefer Shmot. So I figured now would be a good time to talk about it. Now I owe you a class on Chukim, because when we did Kedoshim to you, I did all the logical mitzvot of the first half of Mishpatim, and I stopped at Utchukutai Tishmoru when we have the laws of shatnez and things like that. And Shivcha, there's a whole bunch of laws which are introduced as Chukim. I need to dedicate a whole shir to what Chukim are in Sefer Vayikra and where they're located. But first, I want to go and we'll see in a minute, Parsha Bahar, explain the unit of Parsha Bahar, and that'll help us understand Chukim as well. So first I want to do is I'm going to share my source sheet and explain you the trigger for today. Okay, so we're class 15, and why Parsha Bahar Sinai, which in theory should belong in Sefer Shmot, in Yitro Mishpatim, what's it doing in Vayikra, and at the end, okay? And because we read Parsha Yitro this week, I figured it would be a good topic. So I want to share with you the famous pasuk 24/7. Moshe takes Sefer Abrit, we'll read this week, and he reads in the eyes of the people, and the people said, Nasa v'nishma. It's so cute. It comes out to 24/7 in Sefer Shmot. And according to your kindergarten teacher and Chazal and Rashi, that story, even though it's told in the end of Parshat Mishpatim in chapter 24, Chazal say it happened back in chapter 19 before Matan Torah. Why? Not a topic for today, but just to be aware of that. Now, there's a massive machloket when Moshe takes the Sefer Abrit. What is that Sefer? It says clearly that Moshe wrote down the words of God. He gathers the nation together. They make a ceremony. Maybe we'll read the psukim in a minute. He takes the Sefer Abrit, this book of the covenant, reads it out loud in a national ceremony. Everyone announces after hearing that Sefer Abrit, after that book, they accept it, they affirm it, and say, "Nasav v'nishma, we're going to do, and we're going to listen and keep, etc." And then Moshe sprinkles the blood of the korbanot. It says this blood represents the covenant we just made. There's a national covenantal ceremony happening at the end of chapter 24. But what was Sefer Abrit specifically? That's a massive argument among all the commentators. Almost everyone says something else. Rashi says it's Sefer Breshit, which is a really long book to read in a situation like that. Some people say it's the Ten Commandments. The classic Parshim say it's the laws of Parshat Mishpatim or some of Parshat Mishpatim. But Ibn Ezra, following the Mechilta, claims it is Parshat Bahar. So this is the Mechilta that actually the Chizkuni is quoting in Shmot, and Ibn Ezra quotes it in Parshat Bahar. It says, Vayikach et Sefer Abrit. Right away, the Mechilta says, Ein mukdam muchar b'Torah. This parsha is out of order. Because when Moshe takes the Sefer Abrit and reads it out loud, it's not in order. What are these? What did Moshe read out loud? The Tochachot, which is referring to the Tochacha in Sefer Vayikra and Parsha Bechukotai. As it says in the Mechilta is the Midrash on Sefer Vayikra, on Sefer Shmot, I'm sorry. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, B'tchilat ha'inyan ma Omer. What does it say in the beginning of, we'll see this unit, in Parshat Bahar? It says, V'shavta ha'aretz, the laws of Shemitah, and then followed by Yovel, followed by the Brachot and Klolot. And then it says, Ela chukim ha'mishpatim. Okay? So we'll see this unit he's referring to chapters 25 and 26. We'll explain in a minute what Rabbi Shmuel is assuming the reader understands when he says what he's saying. I'll clarify that in a minute. When Moshe read that out and read the Sefer Abrit, which is basically chapters 25 and 26 of Sefer Vayikra, the people said, we accept this. We do it. And because God saw that, because Moshe saw that they accepted this covenant and these words, he took the blood and sprinkled upon them. As it says in the next pasuk in 24:8, Moshe takes the dam, the blood of the korbanot, and he throws it on the people and says, "This is the dam of the brit." Amar lahem, okay. He told them, now that you accepted this, you're sort of connected now. You tied the knot basically with God. Tomorrow, come and accept upon you all the mitzvot. Means you're about to get. This is a prelude to Matan Torah. Naseh v'nishma, naseh mashakatuv kam. We'll do what it says here in Parshat Bahar. And we're going to listen to everything else you're going to command us at Har Sinai. So that's the famous Mechilta that basically the quote was saying that what happened in Parshat Bahar B'chukotai actually preceded the Ten Commandments, or for sure preceded Sefer Vayikra. There's machloket how to understand which Ein Mukdam Mukhar this is talking about. Is it Parshat Bahar's Ein Mukdam belongs after Matan Torah, after Parshat Mishpatim, or even before Parshat Mishpatim, before Mamad Har Sinai? But that I'll try to get to that later on. But that was my trigger, this famous Mechilta of Sefer Abri. What I want to do now is try to explain to you what this is all based on. Because Rabbi Shmuel is assuming you studied the Psukim. Every time you read a Midrash by Rabbi Shmuel in the Psukim, you have to be swimming in the Psukim and study them. You just can't read what he says and try to understand it. So let's take a look. I'm going to open up a regular Chumash. Did I share my screen? Wait, I wasn't sharing my screen, was I? Why didn't you tell me? I'm sorry.
You haven't really gone through too many of the sources, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Tell me next time I'm half asleep. Okay. I'm sorry. I'll just show you what I read. Vayikach et Sefer Abrit. Okay, got it? He reads in Tesei Nasav Nishma, and they say right away, Mechilta says, this is the Chizkuni on quoting the Mechilta. Ein mutam mukra b'Torah. These are the Tochachot. It says in the beginning, V'shavta Aretz. I will explain this Midrash now in a minute. And then basically says, once they accepted Bahar B'chukotai, then they go and say Nasav Nishma on the rest of the Torah, which will be the Ten Commandments and Parshat Mishpatim and the rest of Chumash. So he's going to put, they're taking away Parshat Bahar, not only in Parshat Yitro Mishpatim, but even before the Ten Commandments. Where's that coming from? So now I'm going to stop this share and open up first the regular Chumash, and then I'll do the English Hebrew. Let's share my screen. I'm going to open up a good old Chumash, which again, if you have one on your own, even better. I want to show you, if we look at chapter 25, there's a new dibur. Okay? Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe bar Sinai lemor. Now, numerous times in Chumash, always begins Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor without the Har Sinai. That's the famous question Rashi is going to ask in Parshat Bahar. It was all the mitzvot were given on Har Sinai, and all the mitzvot God tells Moshe to tell the people. Everywhere else in Chumash is Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor. Why here and only here does it say God spoke to Moshe on Har Sinai saying? And that's the question, Ma'inyan Shemitah Har Sinai, the famous question. Now, but either way, this begins a unit. God spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai saying, and tell Bnei Israel the following, followed by the laws of, when you come to the land of Israel, which I'm bringing you, the land has to rest every 7 years. 6 years you work your land, and the 7th year Shabbat. Got it? That's how it begins. V'shavtar Shabbat Lashem, followed by the laws of counting 7 cycles of 7, and then you have what's called Yovel, blowing the shofar and Yovel, and all the land going back to its owner, and then a lot of laws which we're going to see how we apply these laws. If someone gets poor and has to sell their field, you have to redeem it for them. Depends what field he sells. If he sells his home, his field, etc. And what happens if he has to sell himself into slavery? And if someone who buys him, basically how a person has to own his land and have his freedom. If he has to either sell his land, mortgage his property, or sell himself into slavery, it's his relatives and not relatives. And society's job is to redeem him and put him back on his feet. And that's the laws. That's basically the laws of Shemitah and Yovel, followed by in Perach Havav, the Tochacha. If you follow my laws, all the blessings. If you don't follow my laws, all the curses. Now, what ties this? Why the Chazal are so keen on tying this to Har Sinai? Well, there's a couple clues, because this is really tricky. The chapter division is very confusing here. If you look at the very end of Perach Hafei, the last couple lines, it says as follows: Kili b'nei Yisrael vadim. If you finish the laws of Gula in Nun Daled, if he doesn't, what do you call it? If no one redeems him from his slavery, in the Yovel year he goes out with his family, etc., and he becomes free. Now, why does every Jew have to be free? Why should they not be on slavery? Ki li b'nei Yisrael vadim. Am Yisrael, they're chosen to serve me. Avadaihem asher tzeitu otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, ani Hashem Elokechem. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? What commandment is that, or what dibur is that in the Ten Commandments? This is reflecting
First.
Anochi Hashem Elokech asher tzeitichem me'eretz Mitzrayim. So, Ani Hashem Elokechem, Asher Hotzeiti Etchem Me'eretz Mitzrayim. Now, look at the next pasuk. Lo tasu lechem elilim, upes matzeba lo takimu lechem, ve'ven maskit, etc. Why? Ani Hashem Elokechem, again the Ten Commandments. And Shabbat tishmoru, mikdashi tiro, Ani Hashem, Shabbat, the fourth commandment, and then Mikdash, which we said is a reflection of Har Sinai. So we have like the Dibrot right here in the beginning, or at the end of these laws, right before the Tochacha, and then followed by Zim Chuktai. So I already have an allusion to the Brit at Har Sinai with the phrase Ani Hashem Elokechem, with who took you out of Egypt and not doing other gods and keeping Shabbat. Now, what makes all of this covenantal? We'll see very soon. Then we have, if you follow my laws, ... In the middle of the B'chukotai Tishmoru, if you keep my laws, I'll bless your land, etc. God says as follows: Ufaniti alechem v'ifreiti etchem v'ibreiti etchem v'akimoti et briti etchem. Remember that phrase, v'akimoti et briti etchem? I'll establish my brit with you. That's going to relate back to Har Sinai. We'll see in a minute. And then I'll put my Mishkan in your midst. We're going to return to all these in a minute. V'talachti b'tochem v'ayiti lechem la'Elohim v'atem tu li la'am. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. And then Ani Hashem Elokechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. Again, the first line of the Dibrot, from being slaves to somebody else, I broke the yokes over in your slavery and took you out of Egypt. No, it's a free people, etc. And now you're coming to work for me. So you see all these allusions to Har Sinai. Someone tell me, where is the first time we had a phrase like this? Vakimoti et briti itchem, number one, and hitalachti b'tochem v'hiti lechem lalim v'atem tu li la'am. Does those ring a bell from anywhere? Where do we have them earlier in Chumash?
In the when they built the Mishkan.
We'll have them when they built the Mishkan. Now, you see, we're going back to our major title from Mishkan from Sinai to sanctuary to the land. So we have them in the Mishkan for sure. We have them. Where do we have them at Sinai? I'll just help you. Remember the four cups? What's cup number 4? V'lakachti etchem li la'am, v'ayiti lechem la'Elohim, v'yidatem ki ani Hashem Elokechem hamotzi etchem mitachat tzivot Mitzrayim. Remember that one? That's the 4th cup in Parsha Vayikra. We'll go back to there soon in a minute. But this phrase again, ani Hashem Elokechem, but we're going to go back to something much more basic in a minute. Remember the phrase v'akimoti briti etchem, which is establishing the brit. Now, I'm trying to show you why Chazal are so keen at saying this has to do not just chronologically at Har Sinai, but thematically it relates to the covenant at Har Sinai to become a nation in the service of God. Then the question is, why specifically the mitzvah of Shemitah? Now, what's the giveaway? When the whole Tochacha is over, and if I'm not mistaken, the number 7 probably comes up a lot in the Tochacha, doesn't it? If you don't listen to me, what's it say there in this one? Panei bachem. If you don't listen, there's a multiple of 7 coming up over and over again. Sheva kechatotechem. I'm sure you remember this from the Tochacha. Again, repeats itself over and over again, the number 7. If you don't listen to this, vashimotit mikdashechem, and we'll go to all these things in a minute. But you see the centrality of Mikdash here, and of 7, and of we'll see in a minute, and how it relates to Shemitah. And then the land will have to rest its Shemitah years, etc. Now, here's the giveaway. What happens at the end? When we have, it says, even when I throw you to exile, remember? If you break the covenant, I'll have to take you out of the land. And in your exile, you'll do tshuva, hopefully. But even when you're in exile, I'm not going to abandon you altogether. Okay? Why? Because I'm always your boss. You might be, again, you might be able to fulfill your covenant, but you're always my nation, no matter what. The brit is eternal. And therefore, I'm going to remember my brit that I made with you in the beginning, when I took you out of Egypt, in the eyes of the nations. Again, the same phrase, Ani Hashem. And now listen to this line. It's not only because of the header of Vaydav Hashem Moshe B'Har Sinai, but also the conclusion. Now remember, it's all one dibur. That's my key point I'm trying to make. From the beginning of chapter 25 to the end of chapter 26 is one unit, it's one dibur. God speaking to Moshe at one time. It begins with God spoke to Moshe Bahar Sinai, has the laws of Shemitah, then Yovel, and then the applying some laws about how that relates to day-to-day life in Israel, followed by chukim, if the tochachot, the tochacha, if you follow my laws, blessing, and I'll bless the land. If you don't follow my laws, I'll curse you to the point that you'll be thrown out of the land, but ultimately I'll bring you back. And ending with this phrase, these are the chukim mishpatim and Torot, which God gave you, beino uven bnei Yisrael b'Har Sinai b'yad Moshe. Now, what's the giveaway phrase here? Har Sinai connects us to the opening line of Vayikra Moshe Bar Sinai. But this phrase, beino uven bnei Yisrael, that's special, isn't it? I'll give you a quick example. Look at the last chapter of the book. We'll show you later on is really an epilogue. Doesn't really belong here. The book should really end in Perek Chavav. But look at this line. Ela mitzvot asher tziva Hashem et Moshe el bnei Yisrael b'Har Sinai. That's normal. Got it? The phrase here at the end of chapter 26, Ela chukim mishpatim asher natan Hashem beino uven bnei Yisrael b'Har Sinai. That's a special phrase. So to put this together, I want to trace this phrase of beino uben. Now, who can remember where in Chumash do we have this phrase beini uben?
The
Give me
Shamru.
one everyone knows by heart from Shabbos.
The Shamru.
V'shamru ben Yisrael to Shabbat, let's remember, beinu ben Yisrael otid lo'olam. We make a big deal about it, don't we? I think we say it at Kiddush. No, that phrase, now, anyone know where the first time we find that phrase is? Beini uben? I want to give you an example of how Chumash develops a theme, and hopefully I'll prove my point by time with the next 5-10 minutes.
The Brit Milah?
Even before Brit Milah.
The rainbow.
Exactly. The Rainbow Covenant. I'll show you in a minute. The Rainbow Covenant has that phrase. The Circumcision Covenant has that phrase. The Sinai Covenant has that phrase. And now Bahar B'Chuktai has that phrase. Got that? And of course Shabbat. Shabbat and Parshat Kitisa. But whenever I have that phrase, it's something covenantal. Not only our covenant, any covenant. In my opinion, remember when we learned Breshit, the stories in Breshit are setting the stage for the rest of Chumash. And therefore, I need the Rainbow Covenant to appreciate the Circumcision Covenant, to appreciate the Har Sinai Covenant, to understand basically the Mishkan and basically Brit Sinai, and what this whole covenant is about as a nation, how we represent God. So let me just show you where they are. I'll share my Chumash real fast, and I'll do it with the Chumash inside. No, I'll do it with the Chumash inside. It'll be easier to see that way. I'll open up a Chumash, but I'll do an English-Hebrew one, so you'll be able to follow a little bit easier. I'll open up my English-Hebrew. Where are we? English-Hebrew is here. Leviticus. No. I'll just open up a new Chumash. Okay. I'll start in Breshit chapter 9. Okay, nice and easy. Breshit chapter 9 was called. Notice God tells these are the so-called Noachei laws of Pru and then Ever Menachai, and then Shovech Dam Adam. This is a section of seven Noachas ending with Pru. Remember that phrase Pru? And then God tells Noach, Bani hinimi kimet briti itchem. See this phrase? And this brit is between what two parties? You, not just God and Noach, God and all of his creation, everything that he destroyed and recreated now, everything coming out of the Teva. And look at the phrase, Vakimoti et briti itchem. V'lei karet kol basar mimei hababul. Okay, and that see the word karet here again as well. V'lei karet kol basar od mimei hababul. No more floods, no more starting over. And then God says, Zot otabrit, asher ni notem beni ubenechem. Here we go. Remember, an ot brit, beni ubenechem. And we'll see in a minute, it's a brit olam. Remember those phrases, Elokim, giving an ot brit between two parties, beni ubenechem. And it's an eternal covenant forever. And the ot brit will be at kashti natati bana, the rainbow. And that would be the ot brit, beni ubenechem. Beni uben haaretz, okay, it's a b'charti briti, etc. And then zot ota brit again, asher kimoti beni uben kol basar asher haaretz. But you can't miss the wording of beni uben in Brit Keshet, where God decides no more starting over again, we're living now in a world of tshuva, we can learn from our mistakes, just as God did with the Mabul, and He expects man to now, because the Yetzer Adam is Ramanu Rav, and he can learn from his mistakes, as we explained many times before. But remember all these phrases, Vakimoti et Briti. Now, after this, we disperse into 70 nations. Man again goes astray, destroy the Tower of Babel, etc. And then after hundreds of years, over 1,000 years, what happens? God enters a covenant with Avram Avinu to start a nation, which will be God's model nation, right? To bring God's name, hopefully to help mankind or civilization be able to do tshuva. And therefore, in fact, the next time Elohim is going to speak to anyone in Sefer Bereshit, here Elohim speaks and makes his brit. The next time Elohim speaks to anyone in Sefer Bereshit will be chapter 17 in Bereshit. Yud Kevavke talks to Avram Avinu all the time. The first time Elohim is going to talk to Avram Avinu will be in chapter 17. Avram was 99. God appeared to him and told him, my new name is El Shaddai. Again, Hitalech lefanev yatamim. Remember that phrase? Okay, and I can make a brit binu beinecha. See the phrase again? Pur vuvar be'otcha bimod ma'od. Avram falls on his face. Vaydaber ito Elohim lemor. Elohim speaks to Avram and tells him, I'm making a brit with you. You'll be a father, you'll be a mentor to many nations. You'll be a nation that other nations can learn from. Therefore, we change his name from Avram to Abraham. And then again, Pur vuv ifreito otcha bimod ma'od. And then here's the big phrase, Vakimoti et briti benu beinecha. See that phrase? Remember I asked you before, where do we have it? Brit milah, Brit keshet. Vakimoti et briti benu beinecha. Ubein zarachach redom, the Brit olam. Now, what's the Brit? Lo lachal Elohim, uzrachach acharecha. Isn't that all the words we have in Parshat Par B'chukotai? Vakimoti et briti, we had that in the beginning of chapter 26. The idea of a Brit Olam we'll see, and the Brit is Liot Lachel Elohim. And basically the Brit is between God and Avram, he'll be our God, he'll be our boss, and we'll be his people. To remember that, remember Avram's going to start a nation. To become a nation, you have to have children, and therefore the Od Brit, in order to fulfill that Brit, to facilitate that Brit, God is setting aside the land of Israel, Eretz Megorecha, Eretz Canaan, Lachuzat Olam, and there I'll be your God, Vaytilem Elohim. And now you see a connection between the land and the covenant. Hope that's clear now. Again, the laws of Shemitah will relate to the land. Keeping land not kept, but part of the covenant isn't to receive the land. The land is there to facilitate the covenant. The covenant is, I'll be your God, you be my people. To be a nation representing God, I need nationhood, and therefore I need a land to become that nation. But But God's going to make a brit now between Avram and all his future generations. And the oath of that brit, the reminder will be Brit Milah, will be circumcision. And so Brit Asher Tishru B'nei Bechem, Himodachem Kol Sachar. Again, Vayala Ot Brit, Benu Benechem. Then at days old you have the Brit, etc. And then again, if you don't do Brit Milah, you're cut off from the covenant, and therefore the word V'nichrata. Got my point? I hope that's clear. Then coming out of Egypt, what does God promise in Parsha Vayikra? In coming out of Egypt. Remember, B'Shem Yud Kevavke, God promised taking down to Egypt, coming out, that's Brit Bein Abtarim, but Brit Milah was B'Shem Elohim, and establishing this covenant. God tells Moshe, tell the people, tell Bnei Israel, Ani Hashem, Votzeiti, Vitzalti, V'ga'alti, that's Brit Bein Abtarim. And then, after we get out of Egypt, V'lekachti etchem li la'am, V'iti lechem l'Elohim, that would be Har Sinai. Then you know, Ki Ani Hashem Elokechem, Amotzi etchem mitachas Mitzrayim, and then I'll bring you the land that I promised your ancestors once you accept the covenant to be my people, and then you can become that nation in the land. So again, you see that same theme, and all these themes we just saw them all in Bechukotai. Let me just show you again how they all come up in. We just saw a minute ago in chapter 26. Just a quick review. If you follow my laws, etc., and then I'll bless the land, you'll have peace in the land, you'll win your battles, and by Breiti Etchem, that's Pruvu, Vakimot et Breiti Etchem, see those same phrases of covenant? And then V'natati Mishkani b'tochachem, that goes to our next theme, that the Mishkan is a reminder of the covenant. And then V'talachti b'tochachem, like Brit Milah. V'iti lechem dalim b'atem tili la'am. And therefore, I'm the God who took you out of Egypt to fulfill that from slavery. Basically, it's this Brit Milah and this is Brit Ben Abtarim, and they all come together at Brit Sinai. So you understand, I'm trying to explain to you why the rabbis are so keen on saying there's some very deep connection between the covenant in Har Sinai and Parshat Bahar. Now, on top of that, take the end of the I'm sorry, and we don't listen, but God says He's going to destroy the temple, which is the symbol of the Brit. Vashimotit mikdashechem, okay? The land will be desolate, etc. And then at the very end, he'll remember the Brit. And then how's the Brit end? Elach hukiba mishpatim b'torot asher natan Hashem beino ve'en bnei Yisrael b'har Sinai b'yad Moshe. So that final ending goes back to the Brit. Now, what's this summarizing? We have to go back and try to explain. Is this summarizing just these two chapters, or the whole book of Vayikra, or Vayikra and Shmot? We'll do that later on. All I want to show you first is this deep connection between the Tochacha and Parshat Bahar and the laws of Shemitah and Har Sinai. So it's not by chance this parsha begins with Har Sinai, and Chazal say, at least Rabbi Shmuel holds, that at Har Sinai is when we made this brit of Parshat Bahar Sinai. And now, if I go back now and take a look at where's my source sheet? If you see the Mechiltam, I just want to share with you what Rabbi Shmuel is assuming when he does his midrash. Okay, he says in Muktam on the Vayikra Sefer Abrit. What's Sefer Abrit? He says Chumash is out of order. What's the Sefer Abrit? These are the Tochachot, as Mechilta says. What did Rabbi Shmuel say? B'tchilet ha'inyan ma'omer v'shavta aretz. That's the beginning of chapter 25, isn't it? Shmitinin yovlot, then brachot and klolot, and at the end it says Eloch mishpatim v'torot. Now he's not quoting Asher natan Hashem beino bein, but he's assuming you know the rest of the quote. Okay, and then we said Nasa v'nishma to that, and since we accepted that, he sprinkles the blood, and then we get the rest of the Torah. So I'm trying to show you what led Rabbi Shmuel to reach that conclusion that this was given there. Now, why? Now, Rashi asked a question in the beginning of Parshat Bahar. What's Rashi's famous question? Does someone remind me?
Har Sinai.
Yeah. Why mention Har Sinai in the laws of Shemitah? All the laws were given on Har Sinai. Now, but everyone's assuming the laws of Shemitah are in Perek Chafei. But you can search it, read it 100 times. What word won't you find? You won't find the word Shemitah in chapter 25. You realize that? It doesn't say Shemitah here. What does it say? Shemitah is not called Shemitah in Parshat Bahar.
Shabbat.
It's called Shabbat Haaretz. It's called a Shabbaton. It's called Shana Shvi'it. But it's called a Shabbat. It's called a Shabbat Haaretz. It's not called Shemitah. Now, we'll see other places in Chumash that during the 7th year we do Shemitah. But it doesn't say Shemitah, it says Shabbat. And there's no doubt that Shabbat is the key theme here. Now, look in the realm of time. Remember, we have Kedusha in the realm of time and space. Shabbat is a big topic ever since day one, isn't it? The idea of Shabbat. Now, and the land has to do with the Brit we make. Remember, Brit Milah is on the 8th day after the 7 days. We have 7 days, and then the Brit is on the 8th day. Where did this theme come up the strongest? I tried to show you that our whole theme is based on that Sefer Vayikra is taking the theme, the Brit of Har Sinai. We're taking that theme and moving it to the Mikdash, so that the Mikdash is our continuous reminder to make this a Brit Olam. We're going to leave Har Sinai, but we thematically take it with us by taking all the themes of Har Sinai to the Mishkan. And when we visit the Mishkan, we come to remember our covenantal commitment. And that'll make it a Brit Olam. And then that later becomes the Mikdash, later becomes the Shul. Now, if Shemitah is a reminder of, if the Mikdash, the Mishkan is a reminder of Har Sinai in the realm of space, right? I need a reminder of Har Sinai in the realm of time. And therefore, after all the laws of the Mishkan in Parshat Truma Tetzaveh in the first half of Yitzisa, the last Dibor of the Mishkan after Truma Tetzaveh is going to be in Sefer. Let me show you real fast. In Parshat Kitisa, If I go back to Sefer Shmot, where's Sefer Shmot? Sefer Shmot. Okay, that's better. I muted myself by mistake. Sorry about that. In Shmot chapter 31, God first calls Bezalel to build the Mishkan. And then finally, the last mitzvah is, "Vayomer Moshe daber b'nei Yisrael lemor achar shabtai tishmoru, ki oti benu b'nechem ladat ki ani Hashem mekadishchem." After all the laws of Shabbat, what do we have? After all the laws of the Mishkan, we have Shabbat. So we know what we learn from here, that the way you keep Shabbat, you don't do the malachot of building the Mishkan. But there's a much deeper thematic connection, that just like the Mishkan is our reminder of Har Sinai in the realm of space, Shabbat will be a reminder of our commitment to Har Sinai in the realm of time. Now, as we go through this, look at all the words that go back to the theme of covenant. Okay? Achad tishmoru. Why? Ki oti benu benechem ladat ki ani Hashem mekadishchem. What's this referring to? What's ki ani Hashem mekadishchem? Anyone remember? Where did it say Hashem is mekadesh us?
Relation to you.
That's going to be the application in the middle of Sefer Vayikra. That's exactly why Vayikra is the chiastic center of Sefer Vayikra. That's our application outside the Mikdash. But remember in Har Sinai, Vatem tiuli mamlechet kol. Sorry, im Shmot tishmu v'kushmartem et briti. Vatem tiuli mamlechet kohen v'goy kadosh. If you accept my covenant and are willing to obey me, then what? Then that will make you a goy kadosh. What's our weekly reminder of our covenant commitment to be God's people at Har Sinai? That ki ani Hashem mekadishchem, I separated you to serve me.
Shabbos.
It's keeping Shabbat. Shabbat is an old brit. It's not our reminder that God. It's our reminder that God chose us to serve Him. Now, why is it a reminder? We'll see in a minute. Then keep Shabbat. Ki kodesh lachem. It's separated for you. Now, all of a sudden, if you desecrate the Sabbath day, your punishment is death. Because anyone does melacha, you're chayiv karet. You're cut off from the covenant. You see the covenantal nature of Shabbat? Now, then we have 6 days do work, and 7th day don't work, and anyone does melacha, again, put to death. Then the same is what we sing on Shabbat, V'shomit Shabbat, the Dorotam the Brit Olam, again, Brit Olam, again, Ben Yu Ben Misa, Oti Olam, again, Kisheshi Tamim. I'm going to show you that this has a beautiful structure to it. I'll show you in a minute. But you see right away the connection now between Shabbat and Brit Sinai. You can't miss that. Now, let me go back to our regular source sheet. I'll show you how this idea of Shabbat will take us right back to where we started. Okay, so we had the Midrash of Rabbi Ishmael. Okay, what was the covenant in Har Sinai? Listen again. Im Shema Tishbu Bukoli, Ushmartem et Briti. Remember how the Torah begins? If you follow if you follow my laws, remember hitalachti b'tochachem, etc. If otherwise, and you keep my brit, you be my special nation. And then vatem tiuli mamlechet kohen v'goy kadosh. That was the covenant we make at Har Sinai. That was the proposition. Then we have the 10, followed by the 10 Commandments. Who remembers why is Shabbat in the 10 Commandments? What makes the 10 Commandments covenantal? First, give me a proof that the 10 Commandments, what we call 10 Commandments, are a covenant. They're not just laws. What makes them a covenant?
It starts with Anochi. It's the mission statement telling Hashem is the ruler.
Okay, I agree with you, but give me a technical proof that these 10 statements have to be a covenant. What's the Hebrew word for
Torah
covenant?
calls them Divrei HaBrit Aseret HaDvarim.
At the very, remember, Shnei Luchot HaBrit. Who knows two? Shnei Yodeh, Shnei Luchot HaBrit. And they're called in Chumash Luchot HaBrit. The Aron that houses them is called Aron HaBrit. So the 10 statements are called a covenant. Now, what makes them a covenant? So every contract begins with the two parties. The first party is, I'm your boss, you're working for me, and you can't work for anybody else. Now, the goal of this covenant is to make God's name great, and therefore right up front is, don't do a lousy job. Don't carry my name in vain. But then we have Shabbat. Why is Shabbat in the Ten Commandments? Because Shabbat is our weekly reminder of this covenant. Shabbat, it's not just an important mitzvah. Shabbat is covenantal because it keeps the covenant. It's a reminder of the covenant. It's the old brit of the covenant. I'm trying to explain what makes Shabbat in the Ten Commandments. Now, but in the Ten Commandments, it says to keep it. It doesn't say what the punishment is if we don't keep it, does it? We didn't get the punishment. We just says keep Shabbat, work 6 days a week, and rest every seventh day, and ties it back to the story of creation. Remember, what's honoring parents doing in the covenant? I think the simple answer for that is honoring tradition, because if you're chosen to be God's people forever, it's a Brit Olam. It's not important. Not only I have to be Jewish, I have to pass that down to the next generation. And therefore, honoring parents, honoring tradition is part of the covenant. Now, that's the first half, which is between God and man. The second half clearly is universal. But if you remember how we read them on Shabbat, the first four of the last five, remember, lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, lo tignov, lo taneh b'recha et shaker, are one-liners, aren't they? They're real quick. What's the long one? Lo tachmod, lo titaveh. Now, that's the long one. Why? In my opinion, the first four of the five, those are for sure universal. That God doesn't want anyone doing, and God gets really upset when anyone in civilization does that. But watch any movie, that's typical to civilization, isn't it? There's always murder, there's adultery, there's lying, stealing, and doing things falsely. Now, what leads to that? Everyone would agree we shouldn't do that. Those are universal. Everyone would agree those are all bad. But people do them anyhow. Why? It all starts with lo tachmod. Lo tachmod is a way of life. I know there's a big argument. How do you translate that in an actual deed? In other words, what does it mean? How's lo tachmod different than actually lo tignov or lo tinaf, etc.? Because if you didn't do anything, how could you be punished for not doing anything? But the way I understand it is don't even think about it. Meaning, lo tachmod is a way of life, because that's preventive medicine, so you don't get to lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, lo tignov, etc. So, in my opinion, the highlight of the Ten Commandments is lo tachmod. That's why it's so long. That's why it's one long piece. But I think it's a way of life. It's a way of thinking. And because you're God's people, I can't expect every person on earth to follow lo tachmod. But you, my people, who have to be a model nation, you, to accomplish your goal as a people, you live a life of lo tachmod. Now, that's what you shouldn't be doing. Right? What should you be doing? That's Kedoshim to you. That'll be at the center of Vayikra. But what I'm trying to show you why Shabbat is so central to the covenant. Now, I'm going to go back to the Psukim. We saw about Shabbat in the Mishkan. But remember, we get the Torah, we get the laws of how to live our lives in Parshat Mishpatim and later in Kedoshim to you. But when we build the Mishkan, which is our reminder of this covenant of Har Sinai in the realm of space, when it's over, we have Shabbat. Now, let's take a look at the psukim we just read, which we all say in Shabbat. Remember we talked about these chiasms and their structure? Look how beautiful this works now. Hope you can see my screen. I think it works like a charm. I don't know if you ever noticed this before, but Tel B'nai Yisrael, Achashat Tishmoru. I want to show you why. I have to read this together. There's keep Shabbat. Why? Because God created in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Now we have the inside. Why? Ki oti b'nei Menachem dadat ki ani Hashem mekadishchem. We read that before. How's it end? Okay. B'nei u'ben b'nei oti lo'olam. See, oti lo'olam, oti b'nei Menachem. It ends with b'nei Menachem oti lo'olam. Ushmartem et Shabbat v'shamru b'nei Shabbat. Machaleh mot yumat koseh bo melacha b'yom Shabbat mot yumat. Okay, and we have karet in the middle. What's smack in the middle? The fourth commandment. Work 6 days a week, and seventh day, Shabbat, set aside for God. But you see, you can't miss the structure. I hope that's crystal clear.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So Are Mishpat is Parshat Mishpatim not really part? Are they not on the? Are they not on the tablets? Are they really not part of the Brit Sinai in the sense of when, like we have Shemitah in that section, and most of that section is going to get repeated when the tablets get broken and they get new tablets. When they repeat what's on the tablets, they don't actually say the Ten Commandments, but they do say the second half of Parshat Mishpatim, basically, is
I'm
what's
not
being
sure where you're
given.
getting that from.
Well, I'm
According
getting
to
it from
Chumash, on the second
Kitis.
tablets is the exact same thing as the first tablets. That's
Except if you look at
explicit.
in Devarim, it says that, but in Kitisa, it says
He says also.
it has, but it says then it says that you need Pesach and Shavuot and Sukkot
No,
and
no,
the
no. I
Hashot.
think you're falling into a trap that a lot of Persians fall into. I'll read the
Okay.
psukim carefully for you. I'll show you. I'll share with everyone what you're talking about. Okay. I'm going to jump for a minute to answer your question because it relates to what we're doing. It goes back to Shemot. When the covenant's broken because we don't live up to it, and then we have to make a new covenant with God's attributes of mercy. Now, in chapter 34, listen carefully what God tells Moshe to do. God tells Moshe, "Psol lachat shnei luchot havanim kirishonim," and God's talking. God's going to write on the luchot the same things as shor luchot hamsher shibarta. Okay? That's explicit. Now, Moshe goes up to get them, and he comes down with them. And as God gives them over to Moshe Rabbeinu, hands them over, he tells him, even though in those 10 statements, God says, I'm a zealous God, I'm an Elkanah, I'm Pokei Avon, etc. Need to know, even though that's what it says in the written document, you need to know also that I'm also a El Rachum V'Chanun, El Chapaim. I'm switching all of God's midot from Din to Rachamim. And that's the beauty of, that's why the second brit, the contract is what should be. And as the contract is given over, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu what's called his attributes of mercy, that even though it says I should be strict, I can be forgiving, and that opens up a whole new relationship. Now that we have this new relationship, okay, God says, I'm going to make this brit now, brit, and again, I'll do miracles for helping you conquer the land. But now be careful. I'm repeating the laws that I mentioned in Parshat Mishpatim, but only the between man and God laws. The laws between man and his fellow man, I don't need to repeat. But because your covenant with God was broken, you might think that you can't come visit God anymore. You could be that maybe the covenant between God and man is downgraded. No, God says no, that's back. But be careful, you still can't do, even though I'm forgiving, I won't forgive mamash idol worship. Okay, no, you still can't follow other gods, even though I'm an El Rachum V'Chanun. When it comes to idol worship of other gods, I'm an Elkanah, I'm still a zealous God. Don't make covenants with the other people in the land. Don't intermarry. Don't make other gods. And then we have the 3 pilgrimage holidays when you come to visit God, because God still wants you. But he's repeating the same laws from Parshat Mishpatim with small little changes, relating to with a warning about not to worry when you come, but after you conquer the land, not to worry about coming out the other regel. God will protect you. Now, after giving all these extra laws, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, write these things down. Okay, this is what Moshe is writing. That's writing down the laws that came. What do you call it? They came after Midot Rachamim. There's the Midot Rachamim. God tells Moshe, "I'll write down these laws, because based on these laws, I'm making the new brit." On the written document are the 10 statements. The extra laws that came now in Parshat Mishpatim, in Parshat Kitisa, after God declares his Midot Rachamim, God says, write down, Moshe, write them not on the Luchot, write them down separately. Okay? And then I was with 40 days and 40 nights, and Moshe comes down, with face is shining, etc. He calls the people, and then Moshe then afterwards tells the people, all the laws that God taught him on Har Sinai, from the first 40 days, second 40 days, etc. So that's the so what you were talking about, you were understanding that God says, write down all these things, the Shlosh Regalim, etc., everything in chapter 34, after he announces his 10 Midot Rachamim, you understood that to write them down on the tablets. I don't think that's what it means. I think it means that God, on the tablets, God wrote the 10 statements as the first ones, and then Moshe writes down these extra laws, and they come together with the second Luchot. Okay?
Well, except that the second half of that pasuk in 28, right? Right? So what he's saying here, right? So who's writing?
That's God.
That's God writing. Okay.
That's God writing for sure. If I
He's writing
didn't have the
10.
pasuk in the beginning, I could entertain the other possibility. But
Okay.
now Moshe is telling the people. I mean, the Chumash is telling us Moshe was with God for 40 and 40 nights, and on those 40 days, God wrote on the Luchot the Aseret HaDvarim. This is just closing the opening line where God says "V'katabti al luchot." You have to read it structured. You understand? Now, your understanding, some partially make that point. I just totally disagree. I don't think they're reading it correctly. That's all. But you can read it either way. But when you read it in context, I think it makes more sense the way we explained it. Okay. I hope I didn't go too far off line there.
No, thank you.
Follow. But that's a famous machloket parshanim. I think I'm following the parshanim holds that God, that the second luchot is only exactly the same as the first ones. Okay, now let's get back to our we got run out of time. I'm getting over it today. Okay, now let's get to the good part. I have to do this. I'll have to continue this next week. We'll see, because there's so much here to do. But at least you understand Shabbat now. Why Shabbat's in the Ten Commandments, and why all of a sudden now we have these laws of why if Shabbat is no brit, that's why the punishment if you desecrate the symbol of the covenant, you're basically saying I don't identify with the covenant, therefore you're cut off from the covenant. And that's why that's why you have a chiyuv karet on Shabbat. And that's why you have a death penalty. Because basically you don't live up to the covenant. Because it's an old brit, it's like taking the wedding ring and throwing it out. It's a sign you don't identify anymore with the covenant.
So that's why Brit Milah also is correct.
Exactly. They're all karet. They're all right. And it was called in Brit Keshet, God says, Loi karet. God won't do karet again to his creation. Loi karet kol basar. Okay. Now, you'll see how beautiful this pasuk makes sense now. If I go back to, it's on my source sheet. I'm sorry. I have all of chapter 25 together here. At the end of chapter 25, remember at the end of it what we said? Keep my laws, etc. I'm sorry. No, actually, back to my mistake. It's the beginning of chapter 26, and I have to do it with a. Remember when we had the commandments again? Oh, bye. Where are we? Go back to here. Devarim. No, not this one. Leviticus. Here we are. Chapter 26 at the beginning. Lo tasu lechem elilim. Okay, that's command number 2. Ani Hashem lechem. Es Shabtai tishmoru v'bitishi tirau. Ani Hashem. You understand Mikdash and Shabbat go together now? That's exactly the Psukim Parsha Kitisa. At the end of the Mishkan, we go to Shabbat. Shabbat and Mishkan going together. Again, the two reminders of Har Sinai. Now, let me just summarize what I want to cover, and we'll have to prove this inside next week. Why is the first law? Why is Shemitah covenantal? What makes it part of the covenant? First, you have the theme of Shabbat. Shabbat Ha'aretz L'Hashem. And the land, because in Brit Milah we have Liot Lachal Elohim and the land of Israel. Now, I need to remember that there's a purpose in the land. The land is there in order to become God's people. Now, what does Kedusha do? Kedusha is going to take one item. We talked about this many times. Whenever I have Kedusha, I take one item from a larger group, separate it, dedicating it to God. But the purpose of that separation of the one item is for the sake of the group it was separated from. So if God's separating Shabbat from the other days of the week, it's to bring God into every day of the week. One day of the week is special, and that becomes a funnel that brings God into every day of the week. The goal of Shabbat is to make every day godly. In order that when I'm working 6 days a week, it's my work. I'll be fulfilling the purpose of creation of B'Tselem and looking, because God works 6 days a week. He was creative. God gave us creativity. We have to remember to use that creativity to do good. But by stopping and refraining from all creativity one day a week, that reminds me how to behave on the 6 days of the week. If God's going to separate one nation from the 70, it's to be a model nation for other nations to learn from. If God's going to separate one tribe from the 12, Shevet Levi, it'll be to teach Torah to the other 11. If God's going to separate one place, one makom, it's to have an impact on the rest of the neighborhood, the shul and community, etc. The Mikdat Yerushalayim in the land of Israel. Now, what I want to show you in the laws of Shemitah, it's not what you do only on the Shemitah year. The Shemitah year has a tremendous effect on what you do the rest of the year when it's not Shemitah. You understand why? And let me just show you.
You have to save, yeah.
Yeah. As soon as you have Shemitah, take a look what happens. I highlighted it on the source sheet. We have, what do we do here? You guys to the side. Okay. We have like this. First, we set the laws of Shemitah, v'shavta Shabbat Lashem, and the Shemitah year is for eating. That we'll have to talk about next week. Explain why you're not supposed to eat during Shemitah, but what you eat. You can. Then we have every 7 years Shemitah. For eating, we'll see we'll see that in Sefer Shmot. Then we have 7 years, and now watch what happens. What do these laws do? These laws don't only affect what you do every 7 years in the Shemitah year or in the 50th year. It affects how you live every year of your life. Why? Because what happens? Number one, when you make a transaction regarding land, don't cheat another person. In other words, don't use the laws of Shemitah to rip something. Hey, I'm selling my land, I get it back in 20 years. So I'm making a good business deal. In other words, when you're selling land, realize you don't own the land, you're only selling it based on how many years left in the Yovel cycle. So number one, do honest business transactions. But what the laws of Shemitah are going to do, again, don't cheat people in business and have the fear of God, because Ani Hashem Elokechem. It's basically setting a law about business transactions in real estate. Now, if you know Europe, if I understand it correctly, what happened? There were lords and serfs. There were nobles and serfs. Why? The nobles owned the land. They became wealthy. They owned the land. And if you were born noble, you own land. Everyone else was a serf, and they worked for the nobles. But once you don't own land, you're basically set in poverty. If you own land, you become wealthy, and that just remained forever until someone rebels, etc. Chumash is creating a situation where you can never have that nobility, because the land can never be stored up with a small group of people. The land every 50 years go back to the original owner, but that affects business transactions not only in the 50th year, during all 50 years, because you're basically selling land on a 50-year lease, no more than 50-year lease. Now, on top of that, in a Shemitah cycle, we'll see in a minute, what happens in all these things and all these laws? Ki amuch achicha. This is not only in Shemitah year, during all the years, if your person becomes poor and has to mortgage his property, it's your job to go out to redeem him and give him money to pay his loan back so he can have his land back. And we have to be a goel for one another. First, for your family member. If your family doesn't do it, then the community has to do it for him. And the same thing when you sell a regular home. Then we have laws of them. Then kimuch achicha again, and he has to sell himself, and he needs a loan. Don't take interest. Help him out. Give him a loan so he can buy back his freedom. Okay. Why? Because I'm the God who took you out of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan,
Take a
to
little.
be your God. But you see the idea of the land of Israel with the covenant, the land of Canaan. Isn't this Brit Milah? It's screaming Brit Milah, isn't it? Ani Hashem Elokechem, which is Brit Sinai, Asher Te'eretz Mitzrayim, to give you the land of Canaan, which was Mefurash in Brit Milah, to be your God.
I asked it.
Brit Milah, and hence Brit Sinai. How do we pay again if you have to sell yourself into slavery, right? But you're only up to 7 years, remember? And then we have a whole law about redeeming a slave, and if not, then after Yovel, he goes free. Again, ki avadayim, asher hotzetem eretz Mitzrayim. Okay,
Torah,
and therefore that's going to be Brit Ben Abtarim.
file of writing.
I took you out of Egypt to work for me, and therefore you should be a slave to somebody else. Okay? And then we have those, and then remember, Egypt put you avodat parach, don't you put others in avodat parach. And if you have to sell yourself to a non-Jew, again, we have to raise money and buy back your freedom, even from a stranger. Okay? And then finally, the big finale, so I'm trying to explain to you why these laws of Shemitah, what's so covenantal about Shemitah and Yovel. It relates to Brit Milah, and hence Brit Sinai, and the whole reason why God's giving us the land. But the laws of Shemitah and Yovel don't only affect our behavior on the Shemitah year, they affect our behavior even when it's not Shemitah. Now, we see it the most with what do you call it? With our Shemitah. I'll just give you the quick version, and then we'll have to do this again next week. Let me just do the mute everybody there for a second. In a nutshell, I'll try to do this short, and then we'll go back and finish this up and use this to go into Chukim later on, which Chukim fit into here. if Har Sinai is such an important event, we need to do it. We should do it every. We have to remember it all the time. Now, every 7 years we have what's called Hakel, which is clearly remembering Har Sinai. But the laws of Shemitah go back, are in sync together with the Shemitah cycle, aren't they? At Hakel, we gather at Hakel every 7 years, which coincides with the Shemitah year. I guess we'll do this next week properly. I'll sort of inside. I'm just giving you the short version of it. But all these cycles of 7 are all going to be about how to run an economy. I'll explain why. The first cycle that we have of 7 is Shabbat and the Manna story. Now, every day God gives us as much as we need. Why can you take double on Friday? Because that's as much as you need, because you won't have on Saturday. Because what's God teaching you? It's okay to hoard when you have to hoard. Ideally, you should take as much as you need, but sometimes you need to hoard. Okay? So Shabbat with the Manna teaches you the basic laws of when it's okay to hoard. Hoard what is what you need. So you can take double on Friday. Now, when you come to the land of Israel, there's no manna, but there's grain in the spring. Now, during my grain harvest, which is only 2 months a year in the land of Israel, I can't take as much as I need every day, because I need, during those 2 months of the grain harvest, to take enough for an entire year. So what do I have to do during my 2 months of grain harvest in the land of Israel? I have to hoard. Got my point? Now, but how much do you hoard? As much as you need. Now, that's hard to estimate, isn't it? But that gives me a reason or a heter for hoarding. What's Chumash tell you? During your grain harvest, even though you need to hoard and save up for the entire year, and maybe even for next year, don't forget the poor people. Don't forget, remember, Leket Shicha and Peah. Don't forget other people who don't own land also need. And therefore, it's called wealth management. And the Chumash teaching wealth, God wants you to be wealthy, be prosperous, what you do with your wealth. So if God blesses you with a bumper crop, use your wealth and manage your assets, but use wealth management. Take what you need and what you need for future projects, but always keep in mind other people who are less fortunate. That's going to be every year, the 7 weeks of Shavuot. Got that? Now, and therefore, during my grain harvest during the year, I need to hoard, but I need to remember during my grain harvest the theme of Shabbat. And that's why we count 7 weeks. Remember Shabbatot. That's going to be Chag Shavuot. That's from the Katzir, from the Aviv to the Katzir. Which again, Shalosh Regalim, which goes right again with, remember the Shalosh Regalim in Parshat Mishpatim and in Parshat Ki Tisa that we saw, they're part of the covenant. Now, then we have the 7-year cycle. What are we doing? Every 7 years, know what it feels like to be a poor person. Why? Because you own your land, but your produce that year, you can't hoard. So during the 6 years, you're supposed to hoard, but every 7 years, remember what it feels like to be a person who doesn't have what to hoard, who's only living a day at a time. And therefore, during the Shemitah year, what do? You take as much as you need, not as much as you want. There's no hoarding in the 7th year, which is very difficult for people to do. But it's a tremendous educational message, which affects how you behave the other 6 years when you are harvesting as much as you can. Understand what I'm getting at? By keeping Shemitah, I become sensitized to what to do the other 6. Just like by keeping Shabbat, I remember how to act during the 6 days of the week. By keeping Shemitah every 7 years, I remember how to act during the 6 years when it's not Shemitah. Now, at the end of the Shemitah cycle, what do? Right? I remember Matan Torah, Hakel. But why? Because if I'm going to relive Matan Torah, we'll do this next week already. I'm going to recreate the Manna experience in the land of Israel. Again, that we'll have to do properly next week. I'll show you with the how that'll work. But what I tried to show you today is that the end of Sefer Vayikra ends with Parsha Bahar, which is closing up the covenant in Har Sinai. Now, when exactly the laws were given, that's a technical issue. Thematically, I try to show you today, there's a deep connection between Parshat Bahar B'chukotai, which is the end of Sefer Vayikra, it's almost the conclusion of Sefer Vayikra, and the events of Har Sinai and the whole theme of Brit ever since Chumash began, from Brit Keshet to Brit Milah to Brit Sinai. And there's no doubt the Mishkan is a reminder of the Brit, Shabbat's a reminder of the Brit, and hence Shemitah will be a reminder of the Brit. but it'll be a practical reminder because it'll affect how we act as God's nation, how we behave. Now, exactly when the laws were given, you could argue. But we've been seeing over and over again, in case you didn't catch on, notice all these chiasms. Remember I spent so much time on the chiasm in Vayikra, Yudchet, and Chaf, with Doshim 2 in the middle. Now we're going to see a chiasm, and we'll have to develop this next week, between Har Sinai and the end of Sefer Vayikra. And what I have to show you next week is that how the end of Vayikra doesn't close up Sefer Vayikra, but closes up Sefer Shemot as well. Not Sefer Shemot beginning from Har Sinai. What I have to show you is that there's like an envelope that begins in Har Sinai with Perik Yutet, with Mamad Har Sinai, with Parsha Yitro Mishpatim, and closes with Bar B'chukotai, and everything in between, all the laws in between, which are basically Parshat Mishpatim and the laws of Kedoshim, the second half of Vayikra, are going to be the meat in the middle. What I need to show you is how I can't read Vayikra by itself. I have to read Vayikra together with Sefer Shemot. And when I put Vayikra and Shemot together, the way Chumash presents the laws and envelopes them, we're taking mega themes from Sefer Shemot, from the Brit at Har Sinai, using it with the closer of Sefer Vayikra, and that'll help us emphasize what's smack in the middle. Now, you can guess what's going to be smack in the middle. Kedoshim Tiyu. Because remember, Kedoshim Tiyu is surrounded by Arayot. So we have to follow we'll follow the chasm all the way around, but then we have to see, I'll just give you a hint already, and then I'll end the share here. With my source sheet. We'll do this. But the number 7, we had it so many times. Where is it? Before we have so many things for number 7, not to mention Breshit with the thing. We had 7 days of Miluim, starting the Mishkan. All the Tuma and Tara, the cycles of 7 days, followed by the 8th day. We'll see 7th day at the end of before then. All the cycles of 7 in the Moadim when we come to visit God. Remember, chapter 23 is going to be the Shosh Regalim. And then the Lechem Apanim, remember, we switch it every Shabbat. And then we have the Menorah with 7 candles, etc. Then we have Shabbat Haaretz. The number 7 is going to come up over and over again. Not only in Breshit from the very beginning, but also in Shemot and also in Vayikra. But 7 is going to tie everything together. 7 is going to be the reminder of the idea of Kedusha. That when God separates one item from a larger group, what the purpose of that separation is, and how what we do on Shabbat affects what we do during the week. What we do during the Shemitah year affects what we do when it's not a Shemitah year. And in the realm of time, in the realm of space, what we do in Shul has to affect what we do when we leave Shul. We see that theme over and over again. But it's not about what not to do, what you should do, but how all these laws of that Vayikra is talking about, how they're going to shape a society that's going to represent God. And it'll go back to the theme of why God separates the land, why the land is so central to the covenant back in Sefer Breshit. So that'll explain why, what I'm trying to show you why everything that's so central to the covenant in Sefer Breshit is going to repeat itself and reflected at the end of Vayikra. And again, that key phrase, the Beni Ubein, is going to tie everything together. Okay, let me check the chat real fast.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Let me just check the chat real fast.
In Kiddush, we always talk about Shabbos as because of Sheish Shemei HaBreishis and also Yetzias Mitzrayim. So understand that Shabbos is as the bris, and Yetzias Mitzrayim is because that Hashem designated us as Am Segula, and therefore we have to give the bris.
So again, I'll go back. I'll start next week's share with your question. When we say on Shabbat, Kishesh Yamim Asah Hashem et Hashemayim Va'aretz, is that why I'm keeping Shabbat, or that's why it's an Od Brit to Har Sinai?
So you've been saying that it's the Os bris.
I'll try to explain that again. Here it says in the beginning. Let me go back to show you the psukim again. It says in the beginning, keep Shabbat. Shabbat is our reminder of Ki Ani Hashem Mekadishchem. That's Har Sinai. Then we have to keep Shabbat. If we desecrate Shabbat, we're cut off from the covenant.
Right.
And then it says this is a covenant between God and his people. It's a note. And this Kishesh Tamim, is that the reason why we keep Shabbat? Or is that the reason why Shabbat is an Od Brit?
You seem to think that it's the second one, that Shabbos is the nose bris.
Because, we usually think that we keep Shabbat to remember that God created.
Right.
But what I'm saying is what Chumash is also saying, we keep Shabbat to remember why God chose us.
Chose us. Okay. But,
You understand?
yes.
I'm by keeping Shabbat, just like Shabbat is a reminder that God created, Shabbat is also our reminder that He chose us to serve Him. And just like
Okay.
Shabbat has to have an effect on the other 6 days of the week, God choosing Am Yisrael has to have an effect on the 70 nations.
And then, mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim, is that because,
No, that's a class in Devarim. If you're talking about Friday night Kiddush, that's not a
right,
pasuk. That's our composition. That's
right.
that's because the phrase in Sefer Devarim, "Remember you were slave in Egypt," is going to affect your behavior. It's almost the same idea, and no, this is Shabbat, the theme of Brit Milah, and the theme of the whole theme of Brit Milah, why we're chosen. Then there's a theme of why did God make a covenant that become a nation? We have to go through slavery, so we can tell us, remember you were a slave, and hence be sensitive to the needs of less fortunate people. Now, the phrase of in the Ten Commandments in Devarim, it doesn't say you keep Shabbat to remember you were a slave in Egypt. It says keep Shabbat to remember your workers need a day of rest. The man yanuach, so that your servants, so that your workers also have a day of rest. Followed by remember you were a slave in Egypt. But that refrain, remember you were a slave in Egypt, repeats itself over and over again. It's a theme through Sefer Devarim. So, but if you study the background to that phrase in Sefer Devarim, when we say in Kiddush that Shabbat is Zech Litzat Mitzrayim, it's not to remember that God took us out of Egypt. It's to remember why God put us into Egypt to take us out, to be a nation that's sensitive to the needs of less fortunate people, and make sure that we don't enslave others. We don't do to others what Egypt did to us. But I have to prove to you when you study Sefer Devarim, you'll see that that's super. You can't miss
Okay.
that thing when you study Devarim carefully. But that's why what we say in Kiddush is a little confused. If you don't know your Sefer Devarim called, what you say in Kiddush is a little misleading, because you think
Right,
that we keep Shabbat to remember God took you out of Egypt. That's not why we keep Shabbat. We keep Shabbat to remember why we're chosen.
right.
We're chosen to be a nation that uses creativity properly, and God put us through through that suffering to know, to make sure we don't do that to others, and to be sensitized by it. That's the theme of the Seder. That's the theme all through. That's like a mega theme. It's a mega theme throughout all Chumash.
Okay, thank you so
Okay,
much.
sure. Okay, have a good week. I'm sorry it was a little, hope it wasn't too complicated this week. I'm just trying,
Okay,
my goal is to help appreciate what the Mechilta is doing. When you read Rabbi Shmuel and he Darshan Psukim, he's not just saying something chronological. He's saying something super thematic. And when you follow the wording the Chumash is using, you can't miss the connection between the whole theme of Brit from the time of creation, from the time of from Bereshit. Okay, so we'll stop here and we'll finish this up next week and take us right to the idea of Chukim and why that becomes a summary of why Chukim are in the middle of the book. Okay, we'll stop here because Rabbi J left already. So I'll end the class. I'll stop recording.